Hi, and welcome to Data Talk. Our podcast covers all things data collection, web scraping, and analytics that will help you and your business become more data-driven. I'm Philip Burns, Growth Marketing Director at Bright Data, the data collection and proxy network. Welcome to another episode of Data Talk. And I'm very excited to be with Omri. Omri, it's been a while since we've recorded an episode together. You've been traveling the world, or one part of it. How's Tricks?
Very interesting. Retail is picking up. There was just a new release by the U.S. Government, or whatever, that they will allow for international flights to go back as long as you're vaccinated, which is at least more people than they had, last time we checked. So travel is hopefully will come back. And it's very interesting to see how things are kind of moving on. And for us, as the data is the real economy today. Data is allowing real-time decision, and our market is kind of going along with it. That things are kind of get the blood pumping back again. So it's events, but not only. We have travel, we have retail. So it's very, very interesting time.
So based on the data trends, it's signaling that the world is going back to some normality, or maybe some pre-COVID normality.
Yeah, I just, I don't know if Scott, if you heard, Scott, why don't we let Scott introduce himself, and then I have the first question already lined up. So.
Sure. So Scott Hamilton, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with myself and Omri today. Before we jump into some questions, I think, like we do on all episodes, we've never really spoken, myself or Scott, never really spoken properly before, but looking through your LinkedIn profile, wow, it's pretty impressive. And I think it would be great just to hear a little bit about you and your journey that led you up to this pivotal moment of speaking to me and Omri today.
Sure. Well, thank you for very pleased to be on this podcast. I'm a longtime tech entrepreneur, mainly in the B2B space, and data has just been a continuous theme in everything that we've been doing, primarily in the area of contact data. And I was generally frustrated by the quality of contact data, and I dug into why that was happening and found out that largely contact data went bad because people changed jobs. We have a dynamic workforce. And about 3 years ago, we started dabbling in technology that would query the open web and turn that into a reference data source for accurate information regarding the title and company affiliation for individuals. And it turns out we can scale that. And one of the ways in which we do scale that is through utilizing Bright Data services. So that's kind of how we got to to this podcast is as customers of Bright Data to help us define the true sources for a person's title and company. But our bigger theme, and why we call the company Live Data, is our fundamental belief that the internet is really the only database that matters. And that so much time and energy, the previous 10 years was the era of big data, where everybody harvested data and stuck it into their own systems. We believe that the next wealth generation is going to come from people who can intelligently query truth sources on demand from the open web. And that's really what we're focused on. We just happen to be doing it for contact information right now, but our aspirations are far bigger.
So you see this as the starting point, and the future of live data technologies is much broader than it has a much greater vision than what it is today.
Yeah, I find it hard to believe that we happen to stumble on the only vertical in which finding real-time truth sources about a company's or about an individual's company affiliation or title affiliation. I find it hard to believe that that's the only vertical in which this model works. So we're doing very well in this particular niche, and we're going to keep exploiting that. But in the forefront of our strategic thinking is, what's the next vertical we can start to go after? What are the other areas in that? Once we kind of can figure out what people are looking for and what the dynamic properties are that are changing on a regular basis, how do we start to query that information in a scalable manner so that actions are taken not on static data that's sitting in a database, but real-time true sources that are found on demand from the open web?
Obviously, you have a very strong vision for the future. And do you have any indication in which would be like, or possible options for the next industries where live data will really be in high demand?
Since I was funding the company largely myself, we've intentionally kept the company small. So we don't have a lot of liberty to exploit new verticals at this point. However, being a bunch of clever fellows, we're always thinking about that and probing and testing. And real estate is very interesting. It's the world's largest asset class. So there's a tremendous amount of information online about vacancy rates, occupancy rates, energy consumption, square footage that's available, and tax rates and things of that sort. So real estate is very interesting for us. Agriculture is interesting, but right now we're very focused on becoming the true source for a person's company and title affiliation. That's a multi-billion-dollar opportunity in and of itself. But the physical plant that we're building to accommodate that is going to be flexible for the next set of verticals that we go after.
The notion of an aggregated search layer is very interesting because you are coming from a place that says that there's a lot of search logics. You know, every search engine, every social media has their own search logic. And when you aggregate that, you can actually kind of cross-reference and say, yeah, that's the person, or that's the real estate asset, or that's the open source code, right? This is, if I understand correctly, or maybe correct me if I'm wrong, this is a very strong notion that says there is a lot of logic, search logic around it, and now we can implement it to do a lot of different stuff.
Yeah, I'll elaborate that on a little bit in perhaps an example that will be a little bit more understood, widespread than in the contact space. Is that what we figured out a way to do generally is to leverage the implicit semantic search capabilities of the major search engines, Yandex, Bing, and Google. So if we go to each of those utilities and say local pizza restaurant, they'll each do their job in bringing back what they each think would be the most representative data set associated with that query. The way proxies sort of come into play for us is that we might want to ask that question in Israel, or we might want to ask it in Los Angeles, or we might want to ask it in another geographic region. And then the search engines do their thing again and try to qualify the information that they bring back to us. So there's clearly there's two dimensions here that we're trying to control for, is that each of the search engines interpret our questions somewhat differently, valid in their own way, but certainly differently. And that's important for us to ingest that information. And secondly, there is usually a geographic component that influences the answer as well. So those are the two higher level constraints that we try to manage. And then we ingest all of this information, and then we try to synthesize the true state for what it is that we're looking for. So hopefully that might sort of explain how we rely on the capabilities of the major search engines. There's no organization, there's no company that's large enough to build the semantic relationships that these search engines have gathered over literally hundreds of thousands of man years of development, and God knows how many queries from the population at large. So they've got the truth sets that matter. Now they have an opinion on those truth sets, and that's what we try to interpret. And that's why we balance each of our answers off of the sort of the sum total of what we're finding from each of these search engines. And that's really our application layer. We ingest these, and any one of our queries are megs of volume. If somebody asks us, does OmniGuard work at Bright Data? That's probably a 5-10 meg query for us. Information that we ingest in milliseconds. We go through our analysis and say, yes, indeed, he does.
I think it's when you look at it in a kind of in a data market perspective, it's you're saying that there are a lot of truths in the market, right? If I take it to the real estate example, right? There are, for example, you can say there are 5 buildings in London, right? And they are built the same, they look the same. There's one truth about their structure. And then there is another truth that might say they are located differently in a neighborhood. One is closer to the river, another is closer to, so that's another truth, a layer of truth, right? Another one could be adjacent buildings. That's another layer of truth. So I think that the way that you're looking at the data market, I think we're looking at it pretty similar, is that every layer of data, and I think this is actually where the data market is going to, every layer of data gives you another layer of truth, or closer to kind of a cross-reference of the truth, or whatever. And I think this is the way you're saying, you know, search engine 1 thinks, you know, that about a person, and search engine 2 thinks about second thing about a person. If it overlaps, probably it's true. And I think it's a very interesting point of view on the data market, because the data market is going into a real-time mode. If in the past you say that a data set could be 5 years old, I mean, that's fine. It's still valid today. But I think that the value goes from the, you know, how long and how old is the data set into how fresh it is. And this is the change that you're bringing in and saying, yesterday, I found out that this is, you know, person X, and this is real, and this is true, and this is now, right? And this is the notion I think you're trying to bring, and I think we're all for it. Where do you see that going in the near future?
Yeah, well, let's just imagine any workplace that we've all been at, we've seen or observed, or we've been at in our past, and that we can find a substantial portion of the mission critical decisions that an organization makes will be influenced or informed by information that they're just searching for online at the moment before they take some sort of an action. So there is, I think it's inarguable that, or it's not at least it's not a controversial statement to say that many important business decisions are made by people going out there and manually searching for live information, or whatever they deem to be the best accurate representation of accurate information. We're just trying to mechanize that. We're trying to say that whatever these organizations are doing largely can be done more cost effectively and efficiently, and certainly at higher volume by machines. So I birthed this product by simply watching my BDRs and sales reps struggle with bad data. I heard everybody talking about bad contact data. I said, what are you talking about when everyone says, you know, this campaign didn't do well because of bad contact data? Tell me what you mean. And they said, well, we'll reach out to this person and they left the job 2 years ago. They're no longer at the company, or they've been promoted and they're no longer thinking about this particular topic. And I said, well, what do you do when you encounter this? And they walked me through all of the steps that they do to correct this. And every single time I'm watching this, I said, a machine can do that, a machine can do that, and a machine can do that. And so that's when we set about the task of trying to mechanize the process of searching online for information that would allow somebody to change 2 simple elements: the title of that person and the company affiliation of that person. And so now we're back to the issue of that's not the only vertical in which people are doing that to try to be more successful at their job. So it's like, what are the other elements that it's important to have the live information? A street address is probably something you don't need to check every single day, because the street address for a particular physical location is not that dynamic. So the characteristic of the data elements that we think will have the most value to us are the ones that have a rather dynamic dimension to it. Let's talk about sort of a few examples of what those might be by way of analogy, not information that we're necessarily compiling. But the temperature is a great example. You could go to any location in the world, and there would be historical data that would tell you that at this time of day, on this day of the month, at this Latin longitude, the temperature was probably plus or minus, a certain number of degrees. You could calculate the temperature in that manner, or you could simply say, what does the truth source say? What does the truth source say that is the temperature at this location at this moment? So you have to think about the properties and elements that necessarily have a dynamic dimension to it, that it's important to get that information right now. I can remember when you would get the Wall Street Journal in the morning, you would see what the stock prices were yesterday. Well, that's not the world we live in anymore. Now you go online and you say, what's the stock price right now? So those are the elements that we're focusing on, or will be focusing on. It's like, what are the elements that help organizations operate more effectively when they have real-time information that they're accessing, not something that they're pulling out of their static database?
I think the most interesting part of what you said is the many decisions. The data market, and I feel a lot of the projects that we are working on, and with a lot of the companies, we have strategic teams, strategic decisions, big movements. But at the end of the day, probably most of the decisions made in organization, or the vast majority of the decisions, are small decisions. And taking information to small decisions might be, the second, third step this year and in the next few years, but also the venturing out of the data market from becoming a vague market or an oil, so to speak, market into a commodity. I think that's maybe, if I take anything, that's like the mini decisions is, and it's going to take a lot of our market. And I think that's kind of what I'm asking here. It's going to take a lot of efforts for our market to move from strategic decisions and bulk of information into quick iterations of small batches of information. How do you see that happening?
Well, I think that there's a correlation that you can take smaller steps when you have dynamic information. So oftentimes, I think the scenario you described where you would take longer, bigger type decisions was because you spent so much time ingesting the information that you thought might be relevant to whatever problem that you were trying to solve. And now, if my belief is that if you can bring a more dynamic set, almost like in a live stream type basis of mission critical information, if people have that information ahead of them, they'll take a series of smaller, more actionable steps than sort of the ponderous approach of making sure that you've gathered all of the potential information that might be relevant to some sort of an action, and then you take it. So the world's just becoming more dynamic, and clearly the more dynamic the data streams that are associated with those decisions, it's like a positive feedback loop. The faster your decisions will then become, and hopefully the more accurate if you're ingesting the right stream of data.
I recently spoke to a company that their whole marketing strategy was account-based management focused. I mean, they would literally buy data. They would do almost no inbound and focus solely on basically a data set that they bought 4 to 5 years ago. Where do you think the lost opportunity is? And in terms of real business revenue, and having your entire sales and marketing team focusing on old data, and how does that gap get bridged, not with Fortune 500 companies, but with small bootstrap startups that are really working on very limited budget?
Yeah, well, that's really, you've just described our current clientele. So we live and breathe that problem and solve for it every single day. Thankfully, it's been quantified. So the Salesforce estimates that bad contact data costs U.S. businesses $700 billion annually. Billion. Now, if there's anybody that should know about bad contact data, it would be the leading company who is the repository of that bad contact data. So I think we can trust them with that financial estimate. Breaking that number down a little bit more, it turns out that 20% of the average sales rep's time is spent correcting bad data. So every 1 day out of the week of your sales rep's time is spent correcting bad data. And so every organization has this problem. The client that you mentioned that had an old data set of a few years, well, the average CRM file decays 30% annually. So if they've got a 3 or 4 year file, probably 50% of the records are out of date through no fault of their own. They've done nothing wrong. This is just people doing what people do. We change jobs.
What I found so interesting about it is that their entire clientele are Fortune 500 companies. They are really industry leading in what they do, and all their companies, I mean, are real household brand names. Like, I'm not going to list them, but you would know every single one. And people move so much, not just change jobs, but positions in that period of time. You can work so long to be nurturing a specific lead, but by the time you actually get to that, it's not relevant anymore. They've moved departments, or they've moved up or down or left or right. So it's continuously, it felt like they were continuously chasing the tail, so to speak, that they were never ahead of the game. They were always behind. Well,
it's one of those problems that once you start to think about it, becomes very self-evident in hindsight. Let's just think of, you're obviously a growing company that's adding lots of staff, but you've also lost staff over the previous years. So just think about how many people have come in and out of your company, and then multiply that by every company in the world. So that's the problem with CRMs. There used to be a day where people would publish company directories, hard printed copies of these are the people that work here. Nobody would ever suggest doing that again. They'd say, no, we're going to manage this with a dynamic HR system. And if you want to know who works here, you're going to have to log into that, because I'm adding and deleting from that thing every single week. So all we have to do is look at our own companies to understand the magnitude of this problem. We hire a lot, and people change jobs a lot. That's just the reality.
I'll let you into a little secret. As a heading a marketing department, we recently enriched our past X amount of months leads to understand if there was a shift in trend of job function and job title. And what I've really understood now is that it's totally, we're going to make decisions based on that trend, but because it's old data, the data is going to be to an extent inaccurate, and therefore the decision based on that data used is also going to be to a degree inaccurate. So the future really is, and Aviv will kill me for saying this, but is to be using real-time data, that maybe the time of the data sets is history, and the future is well and truly moving into a state of real-time.
Well, obviously I'm biased, but I think you're 100% correct on this, Phil. And the future state that we see is that before you take any sort of marketing action, before any marketing person takes any type of outbound action, one question will be asked amongst the people in the room. They're going to say, "Is the data live?" That's what we're striving for. Is that before any action gets taken, it's live, and it's as simple as, think of it as when you open a record in your CRM, you've got all of those fields. All we're saying is, let's make sure that the title field and the company field is not a static field. It's actually pinging us and saying, "Hey, live data, is this correct?" And we're coming back with a thumbs up, thumbs down, or no opinion. It's a pretty simple concept, and we're able to do this at fractions of a cent on a per record basis. That we have a fairly mundane aspiration. We want to be middleware. We want to be just this hidden little stream that says wherever those two data elements, title and contact, live in any marketing system, it's just connect to our ledger. It's just good. We have a real-time ledger of contacts that we're continuously monitoring. And whenever we detect a state change, we propagate it out to our ledger members. That's all.
Yeah, very eye-opening.
But one more thing, Phil, before you take that any sort of outbound action, send me the list. I'll do it on my dime, and I'll show you how out of date it is. So. All right.
I appreciate that. We'll even use it as a case study that we're as a data collection company, we're using incorrect data. And I think we do see the trend, like in terms of, search volume. I'm looking at demand and trends and what people are looking for and where there is volume. And you can clearly see over time, even, this year alone, that the trend is searching for more real-time data as opposed to data sets. And I think when we have these conversations about about Fortune 500 companies and the maturity or how the industry is going in a real evolutionary manner, what's the cost associated for small companies, or is it a cost that they cannot afford to make? Like you spoke before about the Salesforce insight that, what was it, $700
billion bad contact data.
Is it a cost that cannot, is it something that companies can't afford to do, to ignore the fact that they're not populating or they're not operating on accurate data?
Well, it's become one of those things that people have sadly just figured that they had to live with. I mean, you think of the example you just gave about yourself just a couple minutes ago. You didn't think there was an alternative to it. It's just like, there's bad data. 20% of my file is going to be out of date. Everyone's just sort of accepted that.
I don't think it's an issue of I think it was an issue of time. It's like, I just want a quick answer here. So it's very easy for me to go and access this and not have to think too much. But really, that's a mistake. Not only is it very accessible to have it in real time, but it's also will allow better decision making. So I think it's an understanding of, when I speak to small businesses or friends or colleagues in my network in this environment, it's about time. And it's very easy to buy a quick data set and then make decisions. I think there's a misconception about how easy it is to actually have the data real time.
Yeah, but once you make a decision, I think I would contend that once you make a decision to buy a data set, the next question that folks should ask themselves is how accurate that is. And I don't, it was a surprise to me, like probably it is like a lot of entrepreneurs when they stumble into something, that no one had figured out these methods and processes to try to attack this situation before. Our very first customer, when after my tech team had spent about a year trying to design this platform, my very first customer is a multi-billion-dollar publicly traded data vendor. And they told me, they said, we know what you're trying to do. We don't think this can be done in any sort of scalable, timely manner. Here's a test file of 10,000 records. Bring it back to me next week. We did it for them in the meeting. We uploaded it to our system and we processed it. And we said, here, just, we kept talking. We were whiteboarding. We gave them back the results and we started negotiating our contract the following day. So, and the reason why we're able to do this is that because we now have a bunch of supporting infrastructure, of which the Bright Data platform is one of those elements. We do tens of millions of queries on a daily basis. That's hard. That's hard for anybody. So many organizations will say, no, I'm not going to replicate that system. I'll just live with bad data. It's easier for me to just live with 10 to 20% bad data. So we're really the first entity that's come along and said, we're just going to be a service. We're just going to be a service for anybody who's collecting data, who's using data, who's selling data. We're going to be a service that says for fractions of a cent on a per record basis, if you join our ledger, we're going to keep that information current for you. So I think, I mean, again, I'm rather biased. I think it's a nice deployment of ledger-based blockchain-like technology. Join the network, do the work one time, and then propagate that truth state out to everybody who wants it. And then there's all the periphery sorts of information and technology that we've stitched together to be able to deliver that. But at the end of the day, it's pretty simple. We just want to say that is the title and the company accurate.
Just referring back to something that just came up into my head, something that you said earlier when you were looking to collect data, whether it's from Israel or you said California. How important is it to collect data on a city or, not just on a country-based level, but when you're looking at the US, how important is it to collect data on a state level or a city level? Because it's a conversation I had a couple of weeks ago about, we think it's a really underrated feature about how many states and global cities that we have IPs for. So how valuable is it to be able to target on that sort of level? And I kind of get it in terms of like real estate, because each city is going to have different, local factors that's going to influence the price. But in terms of people data, like how important is it? And also across multiple industries, how vital is it to have that detailed level of targeting?
Yeah, so I can answer primarily from the perspective of people data. And the best way to answer that question is to say that the results vary. And so ultimately what we're looking for is the truth state. So, and I can describe that to you in a couple of ways, that you can take the same query in a specific geolocation and submit it back to back to one of the search engines, Yandex, Bing, or Google. We're very biased toward making sure that we're using each of the search engines. You can submit that query to the same search engine back to back, and you might get different results for reasons that only the logic of the search engines know. And also what we do too is that we follow some of our the results that we've deemed to be like what if we go into a website, or we go into someone's blog, or we go into the to the Twitter sphere, we can get sort of corroborating information when we follow sort of the first generation of links. So given that the search engines vary a given query, we felt it was at a specific single location. We felt it was important to sort of collect more information to see, well, what search results will they give us if we're all of a sudden putting this query in from England, or if we're putting it in from Israel, or if we're putting it in from another country? What information are they giving us? Can we get new information? Do we get conflicting information? Do we get confirming information? So this is where the art meets the science of proxies. And that's what we like about this. I don't mind telling people the mechanics of what we do, because you're only 10% of the way to figuring out how I'm doing business if you know the mechanics. It's like the secret recipe of Coke. Yeah, we know it's just colored sugar water, but that you got to know the recipe if you want to replicate the taste.
And how do you like the let's talk about the secret sauce a bit. How do you separate two people who have the same name? Could even work. I mean, probably there is, 10 John Smith working in Intel, San Francisco, whatever. How do you know it's the right one? Like, how do you differentiate people?
Great question, Omri. So if you ask us, does John Smith work at Oracle? We're going to say, the flippant answer would be, why, yes, he does. But what we're going to come back and say, we have no opinion on that. If you say, is John Smith the product manager? If we get another column of information, is John Smith the product manager at Oracle? We're probably still not going to have an opinion on that because there's noise. But if you say, is John Smith the product manager in the Cincinnati office? Now we're getting somewhere. So the more columns of information we get, the better it is that we're able to discern signal from noise.
But does it still differentiate people? Does it still?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, what you will find is that if you get enough discrete signals that the client has said is associated with the person, we can come back with a pretty high confidence score that we have indeed have found the right person. And these have been. I can tell you one of the first things all our clients do is they audit us manually. And the machines score pretty well. But we have a pretty high threshold. So if we have any doubt, the worst thing we could possibly do is inject noise into the system. So we only have a definitive opinion on approximately 75% of the records we're asked for an opinion on. So if we're not confident, we err on the side of caution and say, no opinion.
And do they have usually, talking about your customers or people who are using data to identify or search for other people, do they have like open question? Like, sorry, again, from the top. What is the usual question that you see? Is it an open-end question or a closed-end question? Do we see like, is that John Smith? Yes, no, or can I find 5 more John Smiths?
So the questions come to us in 2 ways. Is that someone would say, simple example, is Bill Gates the CEO of Microsoft? We would say, no, he is not. And we found information to suggest that he is the founder of the Gates Foundation. So then the follow-up question is oftentimes, well, then who is the CEO of Microsoft? So it's just different parameters. So we had one client who came to us after we cleaned tens of millions of records for them and updated them. They came to us and said, hey, we have these other 900,000 companies that we're looking for, and we target around something like 50,000 titles. So you can imagine a matrix of companies and titles. They said, fill in the matrix with people who are at this company with this particular role. So in the same way in which we can verify that Bill Gates is not the CEO of Microsoft, we can come back and say that Satya Nadella is the CEO of Microsoft. It's the same question. It's just a different signal that we're bringing back. The first signal is the case, yes or no, and the next one is a person's name. So those are the 2 ways, building and cleaning.
Actually, that's interesting, and I mean, giving them the information is, I think it's half the trick, right? I mean, you found the right person, or sorry, I'll ask it differently because I think we talked about it in our meeting. Are you building them a specific data set? Are you kind of building a long list of answers? Do you find them like using methodically the data that you are generating? Or do you find it kind of like to one process meeting another answer? What do you feel like is the method of operations after you provide the information?
Well, in both cases, if we build a file for them, if they ask us to go out and find people with a specific title at a company, or if they ask us to clean the information that they already have, that data typically gets handed over to somebody like Phil, who's ultimately in charge with sort of bringing new customers and the revenue that they might bring into the organization. So the next action that is oftentimes taken with, or I would argue that is probably the next action that is overwhelmingly taken, is to try to go out and generate revenue on behalf of the organization. But the more clever ways in which some of the clients have leveraged us is they say, don't just go out and find somebody who has a specific title at a company. Find people who are performing a certain task. So if we think of maybe the bright data world, and I'm sure there's somebody doing marketing on your side, that Phil, perhaps this fall into your world, you would want to find people who are involved in web data or web data extraction, or any of the personas or characteristics that if you had the magic wand in your hand and said, if I could only find somebody at IBM who was thinking of this, then I know I could reach out to him and have an intelligent conversation. That's a signal. And that's a signal that we can associate with IBM, and then go out and find who the individual is that's thinking about that subject. Because to the extent it's an important subject, and there is somebody out there blogging, tweeting, putting on their resume that they care about that issue, we're going to find it. And then we're going to find it, and we're going to associate it with an individual, and then we're going to associate it with that person at that company. So now you can start to do more targeted outreach. You can legitimately do ABM marketing, not based on the title that person has, but the job roles, the characteristics, the actions that they take on a regular basis.
I think normally it's defined by skills, not by tasks. But if there was a switch to say, like, you know, this is, regardless of job title, regardless of what their skills are, this is the task that this person performs. Targeting becomes so much, it's a game changer to targeting. Not this is their interest, or this is their skill, or this is their job title. It's often the job title doesn't necessarily reflect the task. But if you can clearly identify the task of an individual, it allows much more narrower targeted campaigns for lead generation, demand generation, etc.
Yeah, we had a client who they've developed a new ointment or treatment for scar tissues. And they felt that this would be most appealing to plastic surgeons who did reconstruction surgery. And so they had a couple of very, very narrow tasks. It's like they needed to find plastic surgeons, they had to be involved with reconstruction surgery, and then they had to have some sort of interest or specificity that they handled scar treatment. And three very discrete terms that we were then able to go out and find doctors and salons and estheticians who were dealing with this, and give them a list of approximately 4,500 people around the country. They checked in with us the other day and joked with us that we had apparently, their top salesman attributes this list to allowing him to buy a vacation home, and they wanted more data. But this is the interesting part of the live data concept is we can't find anymore. I mean, we found, like, you know, the number of new entrants into that space was like 15 more people that we found since we'd done the last build for them. So that is the other dimension of live data, is that we can only find what's there. We can't create data. We're just finding the truth value that is there. So I think this is a great example of how the precision of what we can find when we get the discrete signals from our clients, and the accuracy around those lists that we build, and also the fact that we're finding pretty much the kind of the universe of the potential universe of ones that might fit the profile of who you're trying to sell to.
If I understood correctly, it's not just about the cleaning of data and accurate data, it's also about finding the specific people as well. So it's not about providing an email and company name, job title. It's about giving a persona or a segment of a specific audience, and then you're able to go and find the contacts that represent that persona. Is that correct?
Exactly. And the point I want to emphasize, it's the exact same technology. Again, think of it in the example of, is Bill Gates the CEO of Microsoft? Who is the CEO of Microsoft? Same queries. It's just the what we end up harvesting is different. We don't come back with a yes or no in the case of is Bill Gates. We come back with a name in the event that we're asked to find a person. So same technology from our customer's point of view, the information is used in a different manner.
As a customer, how do they access that information? Is it a connection to and see it live? You know, we might be able to put it live, but in that instant, I want to see this specific field. How do you see that? Are you integrated with different CRMs? We mentioned Salesforce.
Yeah.
How do you, once collected, how do you then communicate that back to the stakeholder?
Sure. Excellent question. Recall earlier we were speaking about the fact that enterprises have just learned to deal with bad, out-of-date data, just assuming that this was a forever a part of any sort of outbound activity. So while we have capability of talking directly to their CRM and pushing our change states to them, most clients still prefer to receive the information on a CSV that they will then upload to their systems of record on a periodic basis. So we do have some education to do to get, whereas our ledger does function as a dynamic real-time propagation in the classic sort of ledger sense. Getting that actually hooked into the CRMs and the other systems of record, people are going to have to grow into that, but we'll get there. I mean, every single pioneer has got work to do with sort of leading to the adoption of new processes and techniques. So oftentimes getting the customers to change their behavior, particularly at the sort of the mechanical level of ingesting our live stream as opposed to our reports, that's just going to take some work.
Omri, over to you for any final words of wisdom.
Where do you see the data market in 10 years? Where do you see, I mean, we're already in real time. In real time, we can aggregate search methods and ideas. We can ingest petabytes of information immediately. We can use, where do you think it's going?
Yeah, you're right. We can ingest petabytes of data, but that's not helpful. People aren't looking for more data, they're looking for information, as the cliche says, and it's never been more true. Where do I see this going is I absolutely fundamentally believe that there will be the next huge $1 trillion wealth creating opportunity is going to be on helping organizations intelligently extract information from the open web in real time. I believe the internet is going to be the only database that matters, and that more and more information will have schema associated with it that make it easier to query. So I can't think of anything that is going to stop that from happening. There's too much information being published. There's too much valuable real-time information being published. It is now the responsibility of organizations like you at the pipes level and me at the intelligence level to figure out how to get it into the hands of the consumers. Now we're almost whatever's before an early adopter. You as the developers of the technology, me as the developers of the application layer. This is hard. This is still really, really hard. And most organizations are not going to go through this. They're not going to go through the effort of saying, oh, I tell you what, if I used a proxy network and I started figuring out how to build all of this intelligent layer, I might be able to get this data that would help me. They're not going to do that. So our sector has to really figure out ways in which what the model is going to be to make this information, this wealth of information, more accessible to end users. Otherwise, we're just going to have this middle layer of sort of aggregators that are going to go up and use people like me and services like yours, get a big pile of information, and then maybe they'll update it, once or twice a year. And that's not what any of us are striving for. We're all striving for live connections to the only information that matters, pushing it into the systems of record with that intelligence filtering layer in between it. So I couldn't be more excited about the live data concept. And we just happen to be named the live data. So
one of my favorite episodes, if not the favorite. I think it was very interesting and very exciting. I think you have a very strong vision. It'll be really exciting to see where we are in 10 years' time. Maybe we'll do a follow-up episode in 10 years and see how much has changed.
Good. Okay, guys.
Scott, I really appreciate it. It's as always great talking to you.